very much. The military is so good at situational awareness. In fact, that concept, I'm often having to explain to people in the business community. They actually don't know what that means. And what I find is that people in the business world have very little situational awareness quite often. And so in order for us to have situational awareness about what it means to have leadership in a digital environment, I want to start with a little bit of history. So we know in history we've had a period where land power was the key to strategic success. And we've had a period of history where Alfred Thayer Mahan, sea power was the key to strategic success. And we've had a period of history, most recently, where air power was the key. And I think today we are in an entirely new operating environment, and it's one where data power is the key. And today what we see is record-level defense spending, but most of you in the military don't feel like you're getting it, don't you? You're like, wait, we've got budget problems everywhere. So how is it possible that if data power is the key to strategic success, and we have record-level defense spending, where is it going? And I think this is the answer. This is Summit, which is America's top supercomputer. It is held at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, which is where we keep our nuclear capability, to give you an idea of how we rank it in terms of its strategic security value. Apparently, it can calculate in 1 second what takes a human being 6.3 billion years to calculate. I don't even know how they come up with this number. 6.3 billion years. I mean, does that allow for like a bathroom break? I don't know. But what's important is the scale of this is so off the chart, it's almost impossible to comprehend. But this is the new space race. This is where governments are deploying their capital. And so it's all of us to learn how to use this. And we live in a world where I think people don't understand even the basic technology that's in the household, let alone how to harness what's happening in this new space race. We think in terms of strategic security that these are the logos, the emblems, the symbols of who is at the front line of this strategic security race, who wins. But when we start to look at, for example, the trade dispute between the US and China, which is not just about goods here and there, it's about these logos. And that the US and China are using these institutions to be the front line of the strategic security battle over who dominates the data space. So that's a very different world than we're accustomed to, certainly that militaries are accustomed to. And for this reason, I think it's important to take note of what President Putin has said, which is that artificial intelligence and the management of metadata is the new frontier of geopolitics. This is the front line of what is going on. So all of us need to understand this new operating environment. I know it's hard, though, because for most of us, our training hasn't been in this space. For most of you, your training has been in things like kinetic weapons. It's hard to change the mentality to a world where it's not a kinetic weapon, it's a data weapon. And how these things are used and why they matter. And why it is, for example, the United States has just banned the Chinese companies that are building and responsible for their version of Summit, their supercomputers. So I'm a little bit in this space myself. I'm a manufacturer of drones, and drones are also on the front line of this story. People have begun to realize that even something you might consider to be a toy is able to take imagery, which now you can run all kinds of software over the top of it, artificial intelligence, et cetera, and retrieve information that has tremendous strategic value. In fact, you don't even need to go much further than the toy shop to be able to do this. and the GoPro cameras that you're all so familiar with. Increasingly, they're Wi-Fi enabled, so anything that you take automatically can be accessed by others. And I think this is the hard part, is things we think of as toys and common everyday appliances, it's hard to understand the role they might play in strategic security competition. So I want to spend a little time talking about this because, again, the mentality is we're dealing with real live physical things. For example, the drones that I make, we work on demining and war zones. It's a very real physical thing. But one of the things I discovered is almost all the robotics that get used for demining, they have no data. They just go up to the mine and they can execute the task, but they can't map. They don't give you a record. They don't geolocate. That means you can't identify patterns over time as to where are they being placed or what direction are the people coming from that are putting them in that location. So learning about how we map the world today really matters. And I think the maps of today look like this. They're not maps of physical locations so much as they are maps of a data space, of understanding a person and not just their movements, but their motion, their emotion, their state of mind, much more than we're used to thinking about. In the world of drones, I'll give you an example. These are the patent applications for Walmart and Amazon. And what's so interesting is that of the more than 50 patent applications in each case, almost all of them have to do with data gathering. In other words, the delivery of the book or the package to your door is really the excuse. But what the purpose of these devices is to fly around the house, and then they know what kind of car do they drive, how many people live here, what are the ages of the children, what's the length of the driveway, which, by the way, is correlated to the probability of the drivers there having accidents these days. You can actually begin to see correlations. So this is the world that we're in, where things are involved in your daily life that are gathering information, including vacuum cleaners. Vacuum cleaners. Increasingly, and we were talking about this earlier, vacuum cleaner in your house is not just cleaning. It is mapping the dimensions of the room, selling that information to IKEA so they know what size dining room table or chair to show you, to advertise to you, but increasingly equipped with voice recognition, the ability to capture what is being said in a home. You shout to the kids, the spaghetti is ready. And they know, they eat spaghetti at this house. But what else do they know? I find this really interesting because in my role as an advisor to governments, I've found quite often there'll be these conversations where they say, we have a very, very critical issue. We have to lock down all the documents. You know, nobody's allowed to take any of the documents on this issue home. And then they stop. And I say, but excuse me, what about when you go home? They said, what do you mean? I said, you go home and you say in the presence of all these internet devices, the Prime Minister's just called an emergency meeting, I gotta go, sweetie. What, you don't think that that is gonna be picked up? You don't think that someone understands the role that you might play and that it would be valuable to know when such an event occurred? So we have to start thinking about all of these devices, not as just consumer items, but as strategic security issues that the defense community needs to think about. By the way, the Amazon Echo, interestingly, has recently been subpoenaed in a murder trial in the United States. And initially, Amazon said, no, 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 this is private data. And 2 weeks later, they handed it over. So bottom line, it's the best witness. And so think about that. It's the best witness to many things. The clothes that you wear that are not Army issue increasingly have chips that are 1/3 of the size of the dimple of a golf ball that track where you are. Because the retailers want to follow where are customers going? Where do our customers wear the sweaters? And so this is a very different kind of environment where your refrigerator is an Internet of Thing enabled, and often these days with a camera, your rubbish bin. The most popular Internet of Things device in the market today are beds. And theory, this is because you want to know, am I sleeping badly and do I snore? I'm just saying it's probably picking up more than that. So I'm just saying. Anyway, moving on. The way you touch or pinch or swipe your screen on your phone is these days a better indicator of who you are than your thumbprint. In other words, even if you use someone else's phone, it becomes easy to identify that it's you. You might not think about it, but I use an app on my phone when I meet someone, and I take a little picture of their business card, and it automatically, beautifully uploads all the data so I don't have to type the darn thing in. Yeah, but who owns that is a very interesting question. And all I can say is when I meet certain people, I don't put their cards into that system for a reason. And a VPN, everybody knows you're supposed to use a VPN, right? We all know this. Yeah, but who owns the VPNs? So these things start to matter in a digital world. And then I added dating apps, and I noticed while I was sitting here quietly, you guys were talking about dating apps. So dating apps. All of these things are ways of triangulating on certain people, who you are, what you're about, what you're involved with. By the way, I know there have been some incidents where fitness trackers have been giving away things like positions of critical military personnel, but there was a great story just in the last few days. I put it up on Twitter. A hitman got done because he was wearing his Fitbit, and they got the background data so they could see exactly where he had been. So, you know, everybody needs to think about this. How many of you have heard about this company, SenseTime? We have any hands? Anybody? So SenseTime is the most valuable startup in the world. It's a Chinese company, and its whole purpose is facial recognition. And it is one of the companies that the US has just banned from being present in the US market. Now, what is it that facial recognition is about? It's not about identifying that, you know, you are who you are. It's about identifying what's your emotional state, what's your frame of mind. It's about identifying the microfacial movements that indicate when you start lying. This technology can be overlaid on any of the data gathering that you get from these other kinds of standard household devices. This is why, again, if you're flying a toy drone over troops, this can be overlaid, and now you know exactly. Are the troops confident? Are they nervous? Are they ready? Are they not ready? So facial recognition is now becoming a really critical part of this whole management in a digital era. You're all familiar with China's Belt and Road strategy, right? We know China can't feed itself. It doesn't have sufficient resources, doesn't have sufficient water, doesn't have sufficient food. But a conventional way of thinking about this is that it's about infrastructure. But a digital way of thinking about this is that it's about algorithms. It's a digital highway. And it's about running your algorithms over the maximum number of people. And so where do you go? You go to places where there's no GDPR. And you get more faces, and your facial recognition gets stronger. In a sense, this is a new strategic security race, is between nations who arrives at the strongest facial recognition algorithm the soonest. And that's why we're back to what Putin said. The new frontier of geopolitics is artificial intelligence. It's facial recognition. It's the data. Facebook. You're all familiar with Cambridge Analytica and the controversy that they created. But think about it this way. All Cambridge Analytica did was to take Facebook likes, and only Facebook likes. And with that, they were able to create 5,000 data points on each of 81 million people. And that was enough to begin to get a sense of how do people vote in any particular household, and to create the foundation for why you would send some messages to some households and other messages to other households. The world I'm describing is one where you have Facebook likes and everything else I just described. Now you've triangulated, and your situational awareness is in a completely different place if you have all that information. And if you don't, or if you don't realize you're emitting all of that, you're in a very different place. And so I want you to think about this in a very different way than you have perhaps in the past. Imagine all of these data points, literally quadrillions of them. They are all gathering in a kind of holographic, invisible space to create what is effectively like a crystal ball. It is literally a place from which we can see reality with more precision and accuracy than we've ever seen it before, far more precise than you can see it by looking at it. It's a place where the leadership skill we need to exercise is how to conjure forth answers from this crystal ball. How to know what is the right question to ask. What's the right piece of data to get me the right piece of information? This is by no means an easy task. And I think one of the most interesting things is that as I go around the world and talk to experts in technology who know their particular area of digital tech or tech generally incredibly well, they don't know other areas. And in a sense, we're all illiterate in this new space. It's so new. It's such a different operating environment than we've ever been exposed to before that it really behooves all of us to begin to work at it. Because if we want to be leaders in a digital era, this is the thing we have to work with, this new crystal ball. And in that space, all of us, me, you already, we all have a digital doppelganger. We have a twin. And that digital twin of myself knows more about me than I know about myself. I'll give you an example. Banks in the UK and the United States already are buying all the data off the internet that is collected from your vacuum cleaner and your refrigerator and your rubbish bin. And that stuff is sold immediately. As it comes in, it's an auction process. And the question is, who's buying it? Well, banks buy it. And what are banks looking for? They're using their algorithms to try to assess what's the risk in a given household. So they'll look at the spending patterns of a husband and wife. And now MasterCard and Google have a deal, so anything you buy on a MasterCard, Google immediately knows exactly what it was. And they begin to see, let's say, a divergence in the spending pattern between two spouses. And if that spending pattern starts to get too wide, basically, they start to assume a divorce is coming. In other words, the bank knows you're going to be divorced before you know. Literally. Now, you may say, well, that's okay. I don't care what the bank knows. Except the bank will then start taking the credit limit of the lower earning partner and reducing it in anticipation of the coming financial crisis. And that lower earning partner may say, now I need to go get a job because this has happened. Who else is buying the data? The human resources departments. So now you apply and they never call you back. And why don't they ever call you back? Because they can see that you keep ordering Ben & Jerry's ice cream on Uber Eats at 11:30 p.m. every night. And for whatever reason, the algorithms say this is likely to indicate that you're not emotionally stable. This is a super interesting point because we talk about the Chinese social credit system, where they've done the same thing but used it as an instrument of kind of societal control. And in China now, if your social credit score falls below a certain point because you left your bicycle in the footpath or because you said something that was counter to government policy or because you went to a protest, which is apparent from the chips in your clothes. You might not have taken your phone, but you're wearing something, and that gave away that you were at the protest. So now what happens is your score goes down, and effectively you can be in a digital prison where you can't order a train ticket, you can't buy a plane ticket, you won't be able to use your credit card beyond a 6-block radius of your house. This kind of environment is already occurring, and we see it very much in China. But I wonder, are we doing it in the West as well? It's just we've sort of privatized the function. So Amazon scores us, and Uber scores us, and Facebook scores us. And all of those scores begin to affect what kind of life are we able to lead? What kind of digital prison are we being placed into at times, including what news do you look at, as the algorithms increasingly corral you into where they think you want to go. And so fighting that and finding a way to get news that is different from what the algorithm has decided you should get, this requires some effort. This requires some thought. And I think it's back to this point that's at the heart of this conference. If we're going to have diversity of thinking, it means we have to have a bit of a war with the algorithms, because the algorithms are compelling us all into similar ways of thinking, depending on what the algorithm thinks you're interested in. This is also a space where we have new qualities, new characteristics, that if you're going to be a leader in it, you have to understand how they work. And General Takal kind of hinted at this in some of what he said earlier. This is a place, this new holographic data space, where you can literally begin to bend time. Because you can go back in time with such precision and see exactly what happened with such crystal clear granularity. And then you can see exactly what happened over time because of the data being collected, and you can begin to project into the future and see probabilistic outcomes. This is a leadership skill you're going to need to learn, is how to operate in a world where you can literally bend that area of time and go back and go forward in time to make your assessments. This is also a place where data allows you to break codes. Whoever's got the fastest supercomputers, they've got the fastest code breaking capability. It doesn't matter whether it's nuclear codes or it's Bitcoin passwords. The data space is one where whoever can process the most fastest wins. And we were talking last night already about Reaper drones, how much data they throw off, and how difficult it is to process that much data in real time. Now we're talking about a world where there's vastly more data than that has to be processed. This is also a world where places like Saudi are saying, we understand this new data world, so instead of being dependent on oil, we're going to build a whole new city-state called NEOM that will exclusively be powered by data. It will be driven by highways that are solar. It will not use 1 ounce of oil or hydrocarbons in any way. So entire new nations can come to life on the back of this data space. And that has enormous strategic security implications. We can talk about also what constitutes the news in this world, where the data is so deep that it can replicate someone's voice. I don't know if you guys saw the video of the Mona Lisa having a conversation. It's so realistic. So understanding what is real and what is not real, what is the narrative? Who controls the narrative? We talk a lot about others taking control of the narrative. I hear very little about what are we doing to take control of the narrative. And this is a different world for how you do that. Cryptocurrencies are coming. China has said that they are about to introduce one. Bottom line is, that's also about tracking every single movement you make, because once you're in the crypto space, every transaction is traced. It's the geoposition, geolocation. It's not only the Chinese. The European Union is going this direction. Australia has announced that next year, 2020, cash will be illegal. We are moving into data-driven currencies. And again, this sounds maybe far from the defense space, but actually, it's the most extraordinary system for tracking what everyone is doing. Add blockchain to that, where you have distributed ledger that proves what was real and what was not. These are all very, very important things to think about. Also, this is potentially the end of the black economy, or maybe not. We have to think about that aspect as well. There are nations in this world where someone will hand you a business card and it may say they work for ABC Corporation, and they may work for ABC Corporation, or they may work for state intelligence apparatus, or they may work for organized crime, or they may work for all three simultaneously, and their bosses have no trouble with this. That's a world I think leadership in the defense community needs to really think about. I gave a talk on this subject a while back to some of the generals in the British military, and one of them said, "We have no doctrine for this." And I'm like, well, we got to get some. We need doctrine for this. I'm going to just throw back a little bit to history so you understand the magnitude and depth of technology change, and then I'm going to open up for questions because I'm super interested to hear where you want to go with the questions. In this country, you used to use a system called tally sticks as money. You'd take a wooden board, crack it in half, and you would mark every purchase, every tax payment in your life, and the other half went to the exchequer. And that worked up until about 1834, when the British government said, we're going to introduce a new technology. It's called paper money. And people were like, are you kidding? I'm not going to hand over something that's got my name on it and my personal history for a little piece of paper that doesn't have my name on it. So the British government said, fine, we'll confiscate all the tally sticks, and we'll take them to Westminster and burn them. But they didn't realize the amount of heat that would be thrown off by those tally sticks, and that's what caused Parliament to burn down in 1834. The reason I say this is because the transitions to new technologies today, we may not see it as visibly as this. This was the burning of a whole system of money and accounting. Today, the same transition can happen, you just won't be aware of it unless you're really paying attention in this space. Now, what was the end result of that massive technology change? The Industrial Revolution. And I would argue that the technology changes we're going through now are opening up something that's bigger than that Industrial Revolution. So again, getting up to speed with how to manage and lead in this data space is really important. Most of you soldiers know that I think you're carrying as much or maybe slightly more weight in the field as a medieval knight, which is an extraordinary thing. So let's think for a moment, what was the technological innovation that allowed armor to come into existence? Because if you can think this way, this is how I think we're going to understand the digital era. The stirrup. The stirrup allowed armor. Because without it, you can't ride a horse with your armor on, right? Little things suddenly take on huge importance. And I think in the digital space, we need to start thinking about what is the stirrup of our time? What is the digital stirrup of our time that will permit the equivalent of armor in the digital era? One or two last things I want to say, because it's very easy to get enamored of technology. And we had a question earlier about being overwhelmed by data. So I think it's super interesting that it was the British who found the hole in the ozone layer and not the Americans, even though we were working on it at the time. We had supercomputers, and we used them. But the British had an extraordinary technology that everyone underestimated, literally. Why? Because the British scientists didn't have the high tech. They wrote down every single one of the measurements they were taking. And by doing that, they started to see there was some irregularity. There was a problem where we couldn't see it. And why? Because algorithms smooth the data. Now, this may be our biggest danger and the thing that as leaders in a digital era we have to pay the most attention to. If the algorithm is smoothing the data, it's removing from our view things that may be factually important. And I think that is something to think about, is what is it taking away? It adds a lot, but what is it also taking away? That is also important to think about what is it imposing on all of us. I talked about digital prisons before. I love this quote from Frank Zappa, that without deviation from the norm, you can't get progress. But if all of our systems are designed to push everybody into certain behavior patterns, to reward certain behaviors and not others, what kind of world are we creating? Is that the one we want? If the algorithms keep telling us that someone who eats Ben & Jerry's ice cream at 11:30 on a Thursday night is not emotionally stable, is that really right? Is that truly correct? Digital leaders need to think about what is the answer the system is giving me. Is it correct or is it not correct? How you think will be deeply affected in the digital space. I don't know if you guys have heard of Marshall McLuhan, who wrote in the late 1960s. And Marshall McLuhan said that when the printing press was invented, we went from an oral storytelling culture into a literary reading culture. And what happened was, instead of talking, we began to look, and we began to read letter by letter, word by word, sentence by sentence, page by page. Move the page. He said, you know what came with that? Was a linear thought process, a deductive reasoning. Now, on the one hand, that deductive reasoning, that linear thought process is exactly what then laid the foundations for the Renaissance and for the scientific revolution. All good things. But today, we're in a world where data has a weight that is bearing down on us. And McLuhan said what will happen is you won't be able to read fast enough to keep up with all the data, which I think is what we're all feeling. I'm sure you're going to talk about that in your next talk. That weight, that pressure of so much data, he argued would make us all more tribal. He said, you'll stop reading the content and you'll just say, is it my team or is it the other team? Am I with this guy or not with this guy? Which sounds very familiar in our current political environment. Very polarized, very tribal. It does other things too, like it forces you to stop using words and letters and compress the data. If you think about it, emoticons are not just cute little things that are fun to use. They are a compression of an incredible amount of data into one visual image that immediately tells you a lot more than text. What else is happening that's the equivalent in our world? I think if we're going to be leading in a digital era, we have to think about this. And finally, what I'm saying is that the way we think has to change. There's just no way that our old thought process can work in this new operating environment. And most of us have been trained to be analytical. Most of us are trained to be in silos. We're trained to drill down, and we believe that quantitative detail is where the answer is. If I just get more data or more numbers, I'll get the right answer. But what I'm saying is no, this is a totally different world where the ability to look across and to see the landscape, connect the dots matters. The ability to understand that compassion and empathy are equally leadership skills as your analysis. And I've brought two words that I found that I've never heard anybody use out loud. I just found them, and I think they summarize what we have to pay attention to. And if you see, it's Xenocide. This is the sense that time is speeding up and moving faster and faster as one grows older. And who is it that, generally speaking, is opposed to new technology? Who usually is saying, I don't know if we should do this? Old folks, older folks. And that's because they're feeling overwhelmed. This other word, atomania, the sense that the future is arriving ahead of schedule. And all those years with fantastical names like 2020 are suddenly upon us and bursting out from a hypothetical cage into reality. We need to be sensitive to what William Gibson, you know, William Gibson, the head of the father of the cyberpunk movement, he said the future arrives at different speeds for different people, and some people get there first. In our job as leaders, particularly in the strategic security world, we have to be sensitive to the fact that some people take longer to arrive at the future than others. The question is how to get them to speed up. And this is a leadership task, I think, a huge leadership task in this new environment. So I'll finish with that. Thank you so much. And now we'll go to questions and see where you want to go with that.
Thanks, Pippa.